I read 8 books in the month of June, and if you stick around, I'll tell you all about them. Hello readers! For the Libri Labra book club in the month of June, we read The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, and this is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. I read this on ebook, which I got from the library, and then I also listened to the audiobook. The story is told from the perspective of 3 different characters, and the audiobook is narrated by several actors. The Testaments takes place about 15 years after The Handmaid's Tale, and we get to see what's happening inside of Gilead from an insider's perspective. One of those characters is Aunt Lydia, and I'm not going to name the other 2 because I feel like it's a little bit spoilerish, but I really enjoyed it. I actually liked it more than I liked The Handmaid's Tale, which was a surprise to me. But if you've seen The Handmaid's Tale, then you know that they've set up these really strict rules in regards to how they run Gilead. And very similar to our political climate, there's these laws and rules established, and a lot of the times the people that want to enforce those laws and rules can't even abide by them themselves. And that's something that you start to see. If you enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale, I would definitely recommend picking this up. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, and I will link to our discussion in the description below. The next book I read was Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I have talked about this in a different video, and honestly, I don't want to talk anymore about it. I don't think the story really needed to exist. I think there could have been many other characters that she could have shown us or did a prequel with that would have been more interesting. And, you know, I guess I'll link to where I spoke a little bit about this book as well. I believe I gave it 2 stars. It was a book that I read with the BookTube Chicks book club, so I'll link to our discussion if you're interested in seeing that. The next book I read was We'll Always Have Summer by Jenny Han, and this is the 3rd book in the Summer I Turn Pretty series. I have been meaning to review this on Goodreads, and I have a lot of feelings about it, but I'm not sure how I want to talk about it, because I know there have often been discussions about people who complain about YA books being immature or too young, and this book was a difficult one for me. I think overall, Belly as a character always felt younger than she was. I thought the first book was pretty decent. The middle one I really enjoyed. It had a really big focus on family, and I think Jenny Han just did the family dynamic so well. But when we get to this part in the trilogy, yes, Belly is still immature, but she makes some decisions that I have a really hard time with. It's possible that she's just meant to seem that immature, but it was just hard. It was a hard pill to swallow, I felt like. I mean, you already have someone who's going back and forth between 2 brothers, and I don't know. This book just made me want to throw the whole thing out the window. Like, I wanted to purchase the trilogy prior to finishing this 3rd book, and now I'm just like, nope, don't have to do that. I'm probably going to get rid of the first book. I mean, again, if the point was to make her seem very immature and to show, you know, what happens when she makes a dumb decision, then I guess the book did that. But really the only thing that kept me reading was the drama, and then it just wasn't even good drama. It was just silly. It's very possible that I'm just so far detached from where Belly's mindset would be and what she would be thinking about, and you know, the kind of life decisions that she was trying to make in that moment, and it's too far. It's too far from where I am right now. So I don't necessarily, I don't want to dock it stars just if it's just me, if it's that I'm too old for it. I would like to talk to other people about it to kind of get a better idea of how I'm feeling about it, but I thought it was a pretty frustrating read. The next book I read was the On Honeymooners by Christina Lauren, and this is the first Christina Lauren book I've ever read. It follows Olive Torres, who is Mexican American, and her sister's getting married, and what ends up happening is that everyone at the wedding ends up eating a certain type of food, and everyone gets sick except for Olive and her arch nemesis, who happens to be her sister's husband's brother. Her sister Amy had won the honeymoon. She doesn't want it to go to waste, so Olive and Ethan, I believe his name is, they go on the honeymoon together. It is a hate to love romance. I really enjoyed the family dynamics, seeing, you know, Olive and Amy and their family and their relatives and like one of their cousins, and a lot of times a lot of their relatives were hanging out together. It was a fun read. It had some laugh out loud moments, and I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read was The AI Who Loved Me by Alyssa Cole. This is the first time that I'm reading Alyssa Cole. I purchased the book and the audiobook at the same time. I enjoyed the sci-fi aspect to it. The sexy times were a bit more detailed than I normally like, but you know, it is what it is. I know that people enjoy that. It was a fun and interesting story, and I'll definitely be checking out more of Alyssa Cole's work. The next book I read is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, and this is also told in 2 perspectives. I listened to the audiobook. It is, I guess, a thriller, and basically you're following, I think, a criminal psychologist and a woman who's been accused of murdering her husband. And so you go back and forth reading her diary leading up to what happened, and then you have the psychologist that's trying to figure out what happened. I thought the actors that were in the audiobook were really, really good. I don't read too many thrillers myself, but I did enjoy this one. It was fairly unputdownable. I don't know how I necessarily feel about the twist in the ending, but I still enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it to others if you're into thrillers and stuff like that, and I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read is I'm Not Dying With You Tonight by Kimberly Jones and Gilly Siegel. Another story told in multiple perspectives. You have the black main character Lena and the white main character Campbell, and there is a riot that breaks out at a football game, I believe, and it gets fairly violent, and they have to navigate their way home. And they end up doing that together for the most part. But as the story begins, they have some major prejudices against each other. So throughout the story, you get to see how they kind of address those prejudices and how they get to experience each other in a way that contradicts the prejudices that they may have had in their head, and they get to know each other. I thought it was really good, and there were a few other characters in the story that kind of surprised me. I think at some point on Twitter I saw complaints about how the white main character was being addressed. I mean, again, like, it starts from a point of prejudice. Both of them are prejudiced against each other for different reasons. So like, just know that's a thing. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. And the last book I read was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I read this for the Blackout Buddy Read. I think what's really important to keep in mind in regards to this book is that it is written by a white person. It is for white people. While I was listening to it, the audiobook is very strange sounding. I don't know who it was that read it, but it almost sounded robotic. Like, it almost sounded like they took some software, threw the words in there, and then it just kind of read it. So I wouldn't really recommend the audiobook for this one. But listening to it, the things that were being said were familiar. It's pretty much things that Black people have been saying for a really long time. So I wouldn't recommend this book to Black people, because they pretty much already know everything that's in here, but I would imagine hearing it kind of white-splained or dumbed down in the way it has been might be a little bit annoying. But that's actually what the book does well. It's speaking to people who maybe don't understand what white fragility is, or haven't gotten to a point where they can acknowledge that they have white privilege. And so the real strength is that Robin's able to say, here's where I came from, here's how my thinking changed, here's what I'm doing differently. Here, like, you have to be able to acknowledge those prejudices and the white fragility and the white privilege within yourself before you can take additional steps to hopefully start dismantling systemic racism however you can. So this book is in no way meant to be the be all end all. It's just a very tiny step in the right direction. So definitely you want to be picking up other books and reading other things, in addition to this, probably maybe following it up with White Rage. White Rage is by Carol Anderson, a Black author. I think something also worth noting is that you will find the N-word in this book. It's also in White Rage. So again, I feel like White Fragility is like, let's just say it's opening the door, right? It's opening the door. It's not even stepping through it yet. It's just kind of opening the door and acknowledging what's inside of you, acknowledging that there's work to be done, and then that should be followed up with other materials. I have purchased quite a few other anti-racism books, but I did give White Fragility 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. And again, if you're ready to open that door, if you haven't opened that door before, then it's definitely worth picking up. So those are all the books I've read in the month of June. I would love to know what's the best book that you picked up in June. Please let me know in the description below. I'd like to give a quick commenter shout out to Literature Science Alliance for being the first person to comment on my last video. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. You are appreciated. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Thanks for watching and see you next time.